Well, good evening. 7 o'clock in Gardner, Kansas. Call the meeting to order. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, good evening. Got a few items on the agenda this evening. We have no presentations, we have no public hearings. We do have a public comment time. However, if you're here for committee recommendation number 1 or number 2, I will allow time at that point if you'd like to speak. So if you'd like to hold off just until that time. But at this time, members of the public are welcome to use the time to make comments about city matters or items on the agenda that are not part of a public hearing. If you wish to come forward, please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. There is a 5-minute time clock on your left. No profanity, no personal attacks. And with that being said, you can come forward and state your name and address for the record. The podium is now open.
We're confused.
I'm sorry, yes.
We're confused. You covered that really fast. Some of us have comments about a proposal of the dog kennel.
Correct,
When
yes.
do we give that?
That'll be very quickly here, but it'll be under committee recommendation number 1 and number 2.
Okay.
So, yep, so we'll take those
All right,
comments.
thanks. Sorry to interrupt, but
Oh, no.
wasn't clear.
Happy to clarify. All right. With no other public comment, we'll move to consent agenda. Is there an item on the consent agenda council would like to remove? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second. Motion Deaton, second Shoot, I think. We approve the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstained? Consent agenda passes. All right, no planning and zoning consent. So we'll move to committee recommendation number 1. Consider adopting an ordinance approving a rezoning county RUR rural district to A agricultural district for potential animal care facility located on the north side of 199th Street, approximately 1,300 feet west of Gardner Road. Tax ID CP 1900000000004. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Good evening. I am actually going to do one presentation. The 2 items are related. It is a rezoning case with an associated conditional use permit. The reason this is coming up is that the use that is proposed requires a rezone from the county zoning. So if you recall, when you annex property from the county into the city, it brings its county zoning with it, which is the RUR designation, rural residential. So it has that county zoning district to it. So these 2 are associated with the idea that by bringing the city zoning, agricultural, which is the equivalent zone to the RUR, there is then an allowance that this type of facility is allowed in the agricultural zone with a conditional use permit. So it is not allowed as a use by right, but it is allowed, if approved, as a conditional use permit, and the conditions that are tied to that permit have to be met if that's the case. So this is 10 acres of land in a primarily residential area, approximately 1,300 feet west of Gardner Road on 199th Street. It's on the north side of the road. What is proposed is a new building that is approximately 80 by 40, so it's a large format building that would be utilized for boarding of animals, dogs primarily at this point. That's what's been discussed. And the amount of dogs are approximately 40 dogs in this facility. So with that, the Planning Commission did hold a public hearing on both of these matters. Their recommendation is for denial of both the rezoning and the conditional use permit. The staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission was approval of the rezoning and then also approval of the conditional use permit with a series of conditions. So in your CAFs, you'll see the summary of both of those conditions. What I want to point out to you in this particular case is because the Planning Commission has recommended denial, if you reaffirm the Planning Commission's recommendation at this point, it is a simple majority vote. So it would be a 4 out of 6 is your simple majority, right? 4 votes. If you choose to go against the Planning Commission's recommendation, It's a 2/3 required vote, but because of the nature of your body, that's still a 4-6. So any action you take tonight would require 4 members of the council to vote in favor of that motion. There are 2 motions listed in the CAFs for you, so that you have that option of understanding what motions are before you. The third motion that is not there is you also have the opportunity that through your discussions and questions and hearing from the applicant who is here tonight, as well as the public that is here tonight, you may decide to refer this back to the Planning Commission. Just understand, if you do that, you have to give some guidance and direction as to what you want them to reconsider as part of their considerations at that point. So I'm not going to go into the particulars of everything that's being asked here. I think with the mayor's approval, if he wants to have me answer your question now, or if you want to hear from the public and the applicant, I'm good either way.
Sure. Why don't we hear public comment first? And again, same rules apply. We do have ask a 5-minute time limit, but I'm happy to take public comment at this time on this matter. Time to come forward.
Good evening. I'm Rod Friend. I live the property directly to the east, 29750 West 199th. And I'd just like to say that I have property value and privacy concerns with a kennel of that magnitude in my backyard. So barking dogs and headlights shining in the back of my house are a big concern. That's all I really have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Mary Friend. We live at 19880 South Gardner Road, Gardner, Kansas. The 60 acres was platted into a subdivision for single-family dwelling and estate lots 5 and 10 acres. To whom it may concern, we are the owner of the property of 19880 South Gardner Road and 19730 South Gardner Road, and we oppose the rezoning and the conditional use permit for an annual care lodge. Our 19730 is on the exact east side of the property, very close to where the dog kennel were to be. The neighborhood has always been a very private, quiet, single-family neighbor. The proposed animal kennel would greatly impact all the neighbors. It has proposed there be 22 dog runs and 40 dogs, which would bring more traffic to drop off their pet and to pick them up, excessive traffic lights shining into the neighbors' properties, pollution, excessive noise, dog barking, at all times of the day or night. An 80 by 40 annual animal facilities is a business and requires a commercial zoning and not to be in a single family division. We as neighbors are all very much opposed to the rezoning and the conditional use permit. It is invasive to our family, single family neighborhood, its values and privacy. The following properties are in the Friends and Neighbors subdivision, and they are 19730 Ron Friend, 29750 199th, and also Clint Bergdorf. He's asked me to speak for him. He has the subdivision exactly to the north and has 3 lots adjoining that property, as well as his entire subdivision. He would prefer they didn't hear a bunch of dog barking. He is very much against it. I have placed on all of your things the letters, and Mr. Bergdorf had asked me to give his letter as well. He is not in agreement with the dog. It needs to be a commercial and it needs to go somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Friend. Thank you,
Good evening. My name's Randy Spark. My wife and I, Audrey, we're in favor of this going through for the Carmens. It's a hard decision I don't want to make. I don't want to have any problems with the Friends. They've been great to me. Rod and his mom and dad have been great to me. If it wasn't for Ron, I wouldn't have a conditional use permit on my property right now. The city wanted to shut me down for building a metal building so we could run our lawn company out of it. And Ron played a huge part and getting the process through so I could get my conditional use permit. And I guess I just feel like Ron helped me a ton. I wouldn't have got it without him. And I would like to do the same thing for Jason and Angela. He's trying to get off the road and quit traveling. And he wants to start a business at home so he can be with his family. And I have no problem with that. And the one thing I would like to say to Ron and Mary and Rod is it's a 1-year permit. As far as I'm concerned, I think it is a 1-year permit.
We can't hear a thing you're saying.
Is it a
I don't
one,
think
is it a
that
1-year?
microphone is on. We can't hear it.
I believe it's a 5-year permit.
Is this a 1-year permit?
5.
5-year. When I got mine, it was a 1-year and I had to renew it every year. So it's a 5-year permit. So I guess what I'm thinking is if it's not working out, we can cancel it after the end of it. If it doesn't work out the way we think it's going to, the way I think it's going to, then it could be canceled. After that, we could all come and oppose it, I guess. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I'm assuming the way I went through it, it was 1 year at a time. They finally gave me a 20-year permit for my lawn company. But I would like to give him a chance at it, and after talking to him, I think everything is, I don't think we're gonna know they're there. All of us have metal buildings in our backyard. Everybody out there does. So I don't think this is gonna be an issue, and that's all I've got to say.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sparks.
My name is Ron Friend. I live at 19880 South Gardner Road. Randy did speak as a conditional use permit, and there was one. The reason I helped Randy out was if you, agricultural is his lawn business works under agricultural, as far as overtime, stuff like that. So, and also I help him clear his lot and stuff to put the building.
Mr. Friend, would you be able to speak in the microphone?
Okay.
Yeah.
My hearing aids are backfired on. Thank you.
That's no problem.
But anyhow, you know, I had a conditional use permit years ago on a Butler building there when I had grain storage. And they took it away from me. The county did. Now, they said that was just, they give it to me to start with, they took it away from me, and I know you can take them away when you run, but I could only have one light out front at that time. I could only have could open on 2 nights a week from 4 to 7. It wasn't public in and out, stuff like that. That's the way the rules they had on me on that. But I am very much against adult kennels in our subdivision. I've been there 80-some years, and it's just, to me, it's not meant to be in a housing unit in a subdivision. You know, that's commercial business. But that's about all I got to say. I appreciate whatever you do to help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. We didn't think it was in the back, but I normally don't have a problem with my voice carrying. I rise against the issue. First of all,
I'm
my
sorry,
name is
yeah.
Frank Bannister. I'm sorry. 19815 South Gardner Road. I'm almost directly east of the proposed building for this commercial enterprise. I am against it for 2 reasons. I think it could be a problem, a noise problem with neighbors. So I think that would be a problem. I'm not against I love dogs, and I'm not against dog kennels. But I am very much in favor of commercial businesses need to be in commercial areas. I don't know if this couple is aware, and I don't know if you're aware, the state of Kansas has a current lawsuit against the city of Edgerton and North Point Development Company to prevent warehouses from being built right across from your all's property. I don't know if you know that. Had it not been for this being tied up for 2 years in litigation, you would be seeing dirt overturned right across from your house, and you would be looking at a very strong possibility of warehouses and more semi-trucks. Myself and 5 other families funded this lawsuit until the state of Kansas took it over last year. We prevailed in the district court in Olathe. The judge said, we agree that North Point and the city of Edgerton illegally annexed land. And they said, but you don't have standing to file suit. The state of Kansas has to do that for you. So the Attorney General's office has taken that suit over. The primary reason why my family and 5 other families filed the lawsuit initially was to prevent commercial development in rural residential areas in southern Johnson County. Where we live out there is the last remaining rural area of Johnson County. Commercial development, we do not want it out there. Nobody wants to wake up and see an Amazon warehouse across the street. And this will happen if we just lay down and we let the city of Edgerton and North Point come east. If you all approve commercial development, start approving commercial development in small acreages, where are you going to stop? How are you going to stop the next one and the next one and the next one? I don't think it's a good fit. You all may be aware of the golden law, the golden rule. Those are points that have to be addressed when a commercial development wants to go into a private area. One of the questions is this an appropriate fit? This is not an appropriate fit. And again, I'm not opposed to dog kennels, but it needs to be in areas that are commercial, not people's backyards. It will be a problem for the neighbors. And I think it will be a problem for that subdivision directly east. So I'm against it, and I think if you're smart, you will say no, because it will be a problem. The noise. I think this is a great couple. They're doing their job, but I just think it's the wrong fit. Doesn't fit. So thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Crystal Wise, 29954 West 199th Street. I live just to the west of them. I don't have a whole lot to say, but I'm okay with them putting the dog kennel in, so that's all I've got to say.
All right. Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Dave, did you want to come back up for questions?
And I may defer some of the questions you have. The applicants are here as well tonight,
Great.
so if there's something that gets into the specific operation or something like that, it'd be best to hear from them versus me trying to represent it. So.
I know we've got several council that have questions, and if you'd like, we could start.
Yeah.
Councilman Shute.
Dave, I know that you've been pretty deliberate in how you've been managing growth and development on our city properties. I also am wanting to ask a couple of questions specifically about the golden criteria,
Okay.
which I think was expressed by another speaker at the podium. When I look at the context of this development versus or this use versus the properties directly surrounding it, knowing these are narrow lots that are sitting, they sit back from the street. How did your staff make the determination that was a congruent use based on the surrounding
Correct.
properties?
So based on the surrounding properties, which are a larger acreage format, so most of the properties in this area slightly under 4 acres up to that 10-acre amount.
Yep.
And then, of course, there's Clint Bergdahl's development that's going on to the north, which is more in that suburban format.
Correct.
So, and he's building that in phases. So when we look at this area, it is primarily a rural kind of residential area, pretty typical of anything you would find along 199th Street, as far as those formats of properties and lots, okay?
Correct.
So for us, when we look at that, we go right to the zoning first. And in this case, and Ryan may want to jump in a little bit when we talk a little bit about this situation, but in this case, all those properties are either zoned RUR, rural residential, or agriculture.
Correct.
Under those zoning categories, this type of use is allowed as a conditional use, again, not as a use by right. So when we look at that 10-acre size, and we look at the fact that it's a conditional use permit, and that the idea is you can place conditions on that actual permit beyond the zoning match, that puts us in a position where we think we could see something, or at least from a staff standpoint, operating that would mitigate noise, mitigate lights, mitigate those types of things. So that's why when the staff made its recommendations, there was a series of conditions that went with those. But what really guided us was the separation of the houses and the size of the lots. If we were in a typical suburban area, even under that zoning, you would not have a proposal like this, because they could not come forward without rezoning the property to something else, and that would create a whole nother scenario here. So when we look at the ag and the rural residential, we look at that as equivalent zoning at this point. It's a perfunctory thing for us to zone it to our city category, because for us to issue a conditional use permit, we really need it to be in that city zoning category. We don't have the jurisdiction of the county zoning to enact that.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair comment, Ryan, right?
Okay, so another question about the A zoning in the city. Typically when I see A zoning, it's either farmland or something like a commercial tree farm or something like that. Or even, you could even put like a machine shop on it or something like that if it doesn't have a significant
Correct.
detrimental effect on the property itself.
Correct.
The property being, in the case of an A zoning, it would be more open space.
Correct.
This, to me, sounds like a commercial pet care operation, which has a significant outdoor presence. It's not just the building, but there's also runs and outdoor play area. And, you know, a little different from an enclosed metal building like a machine shop or something like that you could just, you know, put in the backyard or put it on their side yard and be able to run a business out of. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Planning Commission had a negative reaction to this. Can you address that?
Yeah, so Planning Commission had, after holding the public hearing, had concerns and questions, much related to the noise issue, and some other factors like the lighting and that, cars, how much traffic, kind of things that you heard tonight. So they heard the same things. I would say that went into their decision as well. And again, understand, as we go through this process, staff's role is to look at it in light of the ordinances and what's allowed.
And the use
And
requirements.
then when the public hearing comes into play, that's where the Planning Commission, I would say they were listening to the public comments, they listened to the applicant, they had significant discussion, had a number of questions, and that's where they landed with those concerns of that noise and those elements. Now, if we want to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the operation as far as outdoor, indoor, I think that's where the applicant, you might want to invite them up
I would love to hear
talk
from
about
them.
that,
Yes.
because what has been proposed is that 40 by 80 interior structure, which our understanding is where a lot of the boarding activities will occur.
Sure.
The outdoor runs are for exercise and things like that, but I would prefer that the applicant speaks that, because you're kind of asking
Yeah.
about the split.
That's
if you
kind of
will,
what I'm looking for,
and
because
I'd rather they respond to that.
in an enclosed building, you can have some sound mitigation, but
Correct, and I
in the
think that,
outdoor,
I think
it's harder.
the building was being designed with sound mitigation in mind, but again, I'd let them kind of come up here and speak to
Okay,
that.
great, thank you.
Do you want to do that? Then
Yeah, we
we'll
can have them
open
come up and speak to that issue.
Hey Dave, do we have that presentation that I had? I
Probably,
think this will outline
not
that.
on that slide, I can go look and see if I can find it.
Was it in the submittal? Do you know? I know,
They
Bob
did
was.
not have access to it. It was in the minutes, so if they watched the YouTube
Okay.
proceedings and that, they would have seen that material.
All right.
But if I need to, we can.
I'll try to cover it here just verbally. I've got one paper copy of what we submitted in, but I think this will outline.
Name and address for the record, please.
Yep. So Jason Carmen, 29852 West 199th Street. So what we're proposing to build, so these are 10-acre lots. I'm not sure if you're real familiar. I was hoping to have some imagery on here so you can kind of see how they're set up. So you're right. These are 10-acre lots. fairly long with them. And where we are proposing to put this, this structure is at the back side of the lot, which is currently kind of enclosed by a tree-lined area on there. So it's enclosed to the north, to the west, and to the south currently. And then within the plan, we've put in additional tree lines on the east side as well. The building itself will be a 40 by 80 enclosed building on it, acoustically insulated on there. So we've done calculations on the number of dogs inside there, along with what we expect for the acoustic dampening in the building. When dogs are inside of this building, it's expected that you won't be able to hear them outside of the property line on there, okay? Just how everything's constructed. Now, there are gonna be some outdoor runs as well too. This is gonna be an actively managed facility on there. So maximum occupancy, I know people have said, hey, could hold up to 40 dogs. That's because I was asked, how big is this building and how many could you fit inside of there? Well, we could potentially have 40 dogs. That is not gonna be what we're gonna start with on here. And even when it is at whatever capacity on there, the way that we'll be moving dogs in and out, they're not going to be outside all day. They're going to be grouped based on temperament and activity. Like I said, I'm going to be there managing this all day long. There'll probably be 5 dogs outside at a time, right? That are playing. There'll be an indoor play area that they'll also be playing in. But outside for runs and stuff, it'll be, you know, kind of a play area. Go outside for however long the duration is, and they're kind of be on rotations because they have to play together during this time too, and be watched, and it'll kind of be batches that are going outside, coming back inside, going to their areas, and playing inside as well.
So how many dogs at a time maximum are you thinking when you're shifting them off? How many dogs are you thinking here?
Outdoors or
Outdoors at a time.
Outdoors, 5 to 10.
5 to 10.
Yep.
Okay.
That's the expectation.
So up to a quarter of the capacity of the shelter at any one time.
Exactly. Yep. So that they can be managed, they can be watched, they can be supervised out there while they're playing together, because that's going to be group play activity time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And presumably they'll be barking because they're
Dog-
dogs.
Dogs bark. So that's
Yes.
the beauty. That's the beauty, and that's why I was hoping you guys had some of these calculations on here too. So with the placement of it, if you draw out like 1,000 foot radius, actually, if you take a look at all the houses that we've got in here, let me double check here
believe
so I
there's
get my
5.
numbers right. At the loudest with dogs outside barking with the expected noise that they're going to be making in this area. The loudest that it will be at one of the neighbors' houses is at 43 dB. So because of the distance on there, and this is assuming no tree line attenuation as well, that is equivalent to a soft whisper from 5 feet away. That's per OSHA guidelines on there as well too. So that's the beauty of this location, is it's such a distance away from any actual residences on there. So we have neighboring properties on there. There's no houses back by where we're putting this.
To clarify, those
Yep.
trees that go east-west at the back of your property,
Mhm.
not all the way back, but right where the building's going,
Yep.
are those trees staying to the south of the building?
They'll stay there.
Okay.
Yep, so currently there's heavy tree line to the north,
Yeah.
there's good tree line to the west, there's tree line to the south, and then we'll be planting trees on the east side as well too.
There's a streamway between you and the Tuscan Farms. So
There is, and there's 3 tree lines in between as well. And I've got that back section on the other side of the creek before it gets to the Tuscan Farms area.
Could you go into a little more detail, decibel levels where the neighboring houses would be for the outside activities of the dogs? And how it was measured and who did the measurements?
Yep, so that's done on what's called the inverse square law. So it's a pretty common method to check acoustic levels, right? So it's physics essentially, right? We do it at my workplace on here for anytime we're checking ambient noise levels and what it's going to be perceived at a distance away from it. So that was calculated on here. It was double checked with, I mean, it's a pretty common calculation on there. So it was double checked, actually triple checked, with several online methods as well too, just to confirm everything's coming up the same.
And that was at 43 dB, you said?
43 is the closest one, so it's ranging from 37 dB to 43 dB.
And if I'm not mistaken, normal conversations about 50 to 60 dB, is that correct?
That's correct. 60 dB is a conversation from 3 feet away.
questions, so if anybody else wanted to ask.
Steve, you have some questions?
I just want to make sure that I understand what we're looking at. It's two separate issues. This is first day. One is bringing zoning up to from RUR into a compatible zoning for within the city of Gardner. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Which is separate from the conditional use permit.
Separate but related. I'm gonna start to sound like Tom Hanks in Bridge of Spies. So, just so you're aware. But when you look at this, they are separate but related. So, in order to qualify for the conditional use permit under our regulations, the city's regulations, the rezoning would have to occur to get to the A zoning district. Your action on the A zoning district does not automatically guarantee the conditional use permit. So it's separate, but it's related in that sense.
Just so I'm clear, I just want to make sure that I understand.
Yeah.
So, the first item on this is to make bring that annexed area into an equivalent type of zoning here, which is a separate item from the conditional
Yes.
use permit. And that could happen, and probably needs to happen, just to make things compatible with where we are, with the city. Is that
Again,
correct?
Ryan, I'm gonna have you also chime in a little bit on this, but from that perspective, for us as a city staff, we administer the city zoning code. To have it in a city district is what makes it relatable for us on our everyday work basis, so it's an easier thing than trying
Which is
to
separate.
enforce the county
It's
zoning.
a separate item away from the conditional use permit. One could be approved without the other, is that correct?
The conditional use permit cannot be approved
I
without the
understand, but the zoning
rezoning, but
could
the
be-
rezoning can be approved without the conditional use permit.
So they're separate items.
Yes.
Yes, but I think
One
the
and two.
reason they're asking for the rezoning is because of the conditional use permit.
Correct.
That would be correct. When they came in with their business proposal for this, their activity proposal for this activity, when they came in with that, that is where we looked at the code and said, in order to do this, you have to have these two things.
And with the conditional use permit, it's a 5-year permit. Does that have a first year, second year annual review?
So-
Administrative review process?
So the staff recommendation was for a 5-year permit. The planning commission, as well as you all, have the ability to adjust that any way you see fit. It is merely a recommendation. So if you wanted to go to a shorter time frame with interim administrative review points to check and see if there are issues or complaints, that's something where we would reword conditions per what your guidance is. So that's possible. So the 5 year is simply there. I will also say that if you're going that direction with conditions, there are other things you can look at, like capping the capacity or certain operational things too as well with that conditional use permit. Would have nothing to do with the zoning again. That would be more with the conditional use permit.
So we could add, if we were to look at this, we could have an administrative review very similar to the administrative reviews that were processed cigar shop or the food courts and that kind of stuff, food trailers.
Yes, we've used that kind of process before on other conditional use permits where we've put together a formal administrative review we check usually for complaints with the police department to see if the fire department's got any issues. Anybody's had operational issues. We also send out letters to the surrounding neighbors to see if there is any issues with the operation over the past year. If our findings administratively or there seem to be things that are going against the conditional use permit at that point or anything, we could bring them back in for revocation consideration or see what's actually going on. Having said that, we have that same kind of authority under some of the nuisance laws and things like that. So, noises, exceptionally high noise levels, lighting, glare, issues like that under our nuisance codes and some of our other codes are also code enforcement elements that can be utilized outside of the conditional use permit.
So hypothetically, if we approved a conditional use, and had a 1-year administrative review with neighbor complaints and whatnot, we could kind of control and make sure that things are running the way we had anticipated.
You could. That's an option that's available to you. I will say you will want to talk with the applicant about that because What I don't know is the significant amount of money that may be used to invest in this, and a 1-year risk versus a 5-year risk may be something where that's not feasible for them to operate that way. So that's
That would be a business decision of their own.
That's correct, but I would say you would want to ask the applicant about how they feel about that condition, if you have concerns about doing that.
Would you like to ask the applicant?
Do you have a problem with 1-year review?
So I think
They could, you could be put out of business at the end of 1 year.
Yep, so I think what I would need to understand is what's the criteria that it would be graded against on there as well too. If it's just hearsay type of nuisances on there, that would not be appropriate by any means, right? I mean, look, guys, I live in this neighborhood too. I love all my neighbors that are back here, right? This is not the intention, is to create any division or to create any nuisances in the neighborhood. That's why it's planned out the way that it was so that this would not be an obstacle for them. I do not want to put a risk out there though in 1 year if it's just, hey, I got 5 phone calls that were unfounded on there, and so we're gonna shut you down. Because like Dave said, this has been my concern on reducing that down too far, is this is a big capital investment, right? With the requirements that are necessary to be able to adhere to all the city guidelines on here. It's a significant amount for me and my family that I need that 5-year time period, right, or roughly, to be able to say, hey, we're in, obviously, if there are real nuisances, I assume that we've got legalities that are set up to shut it down at that point, right? I mean, complaints come in.
Set up to be unreasonable. What it would be is make sure that what was maybe outlined, if we were to approve something like this, with that kind of condition, that the guidelines are being met, administratively reviewed year after year for the first couple of years, just to make sure that everybody's playing by the.
Let me let me interrupt real quick here. There's 6 mitigating requirements that the city had asked for with regard to this particular zoning, and I just wanted to read them out really quickly here because some folks might not have it in front of them. The first one is that all drive access and parking areas to and from the dog belt boarding facility from 99th Street shall be paved with a hard surface, not gravel, it will be a hard surface. Constructed to meet adopted city technical specifications and construction standards and withstand use by emergency services vehicles. So if they have any type of fire or any other type of need from first responders, they can get there. Number 2, on the site plan, provide construction details for an area that addresses the treatment of high bacteria loads and specifications on how waste is being treated. I think there was a question from somebody who was speaking before that there was no plan as of yet as to how to handle the waste disposal. I think that would be a requirement of this going forward. Number 3, the construction plans for any utilities, infrastructure, stormwater, or other public facilities shall meet all technical specifications, and that land disturbance and public improvement plans shall be submitted and approved prior to the issuance of a building permit. So they would have to go and actually take care of some of these mitigating circumstances. This, by the way, is the standard by which this would be measured
Exactly.
in a conditional use permit scenario. Okay? Provide visual screening from adjacent properties along the east side of the proposed facility. That's to try to mitigate the light pollution issue. Number 5, provide noise dampening measures within the wall construction of the boarding facility, which you've already addressed, sir. And the conditional use permit would then be for a 5-year period, starting on the date of approval by the governing body. After 5 years, if the applicant is abiding by all conditions above, which is those first 5, okay, then they can apply for an extended conditional use permit at that point through the planning commission and the governing body. So that's the criteria right there, Steve.
I agree.
As of right now.
Unless we amended it.
Unless there's an amendment, okay? But I'll be perfectly honest with you, we have a 6-0 motion here to deny. All right? We've placed some trust in our planning commission, all right? They are appointed by the body to serve as our eyes and ears on this. We would have to come up with a real justification as to why we would overturn a 6-0 decision on the part of the planning commission. So, the commercial use and the contextual aspects of this are the reasons why they were denied. So we would need to be convinced that those would not be going forward justification to deny.
Thanks, Steve.
I have some questions.
That's good. Yeah.
This
but I've never run a dog boarding facility before. Do you know in Johnson County, the dog boarding facilities, are most of them in commercial areas, or are they in more agricultural and rural areas?
So the county allows for these types of facilities in rural areas as well. The applicant, as part of the Planning Commission, also presented that there is a facility similar to this, I think in scale and size, further by Spring Hill, in the Spring Hill area. So it's not I'm going to say it's not unusual, but it is also not so prevalent that everybody's doing it. So many of the conditional uses that you see in agricultural or rural districts recognize large lots, number one, that the configuration is larger than the norm. And many times they're associated with what I'll call adjunct kind of employment or at-home types of employment. It's not unusual in agricultural areas to see somebody who's doing farm machinery repair out of a building like this, or something that's adjunct to maybe their farming activity or some other employment. So it is not completely unusual to see some of these types of proposals come forward in these larger format buildings that many times look like other ag buildings. Their Butler buildings are pretty standard. But I do know the applicant had brought forward at least one example near the Spring Hill area that's in a similar context, and he may want to talk further about that.
Yeah, it's called Mystic Acres. Some of you may be familiar with it. A lot of Gardner residents will go out to that facility, set up almost identical to what I'm proposing here, except their facility is almost twice as large as what I'm proposing. They've got the same lot size on there. I went out, actually my wife and I went out and personally spoke with, when we were kind of considering this, with the neighbors that were around there to see if they had any concerns or complaints, because their houses are actually closer to the facility than, well, a larger facility than what we're proposing here. Legitimately zero complaints. They said, no, you barely even notice that it's there. They said once in a while you hear a dog barking, but no different than any other neighbor that's got, right? So if the point is that in a setting like this, if it's managed and built and constructed properly and has processes in place, it should not be a nuisance to any neighboring facility, right?
Casey, do you have any questions?
So, because this feels a little commercially to me, let's say that he wanted a food truck, or let's say the next door neighbor wants a food truck because, well, they put in a business, now I want a business. Like, does that look the same? I mean, it's a conditional use permit, which we've already had one of those denied this year for lights and noise pollution and smells and all sorts of things like that. And so I'm just picturing every lot in that row could then have an event space, a winery, a food truck, and what would stop that from being a commercial row?
So we're gonna get into a couple things here. I'm gonna be very careful about what I say, because the state does have some regulations about ag tourism, which allows for certain things like wineries and other stuff to exist. And that's a whole nother realm. I don't even really want to enter into that, because that is something that has been put into state statutes and has been talked about in other forums. But what I will say is, again, not every business or a business type use is allowed to have a conditional use under the ag zoning. So there's only a few uses in the agricultural district where there's this allowance for conditional use permits, again, recognizing the large format of land. So it does not open you up to every kind of business that's allowed in all of our commercial zoning. That's why the ag zoning is the limitation, the grand limitation of use, okay, and those things under the ag zoning. And then there's only a handful of conditional uses under ag that are allowed. And again, a lot of them are those adjunct or associated secondary, sometimes secondary businesses, but again, with the advent of at-home businesses and things like that, you get some of these unusual applications for somebody who may have a hobby where they're producing furniture, right? And they take it to art shows or something like that, but then they decide, well, now I'm going to sell it online. Now, are we a business versus a hobby? And so we do run into those kinds of situations as well. And we would have to look at that again as a conditional use permit, because it is considered a business at that point.
And so is this allowed because, like, the association with ag, because animals are involved?
That I could not answer, okay? This is, I've found it in other zoning laws with other jurisdictions. It seems to be a common item. I don't know if it's because of the nature of supplying a business to a more rural area where you have dogs and things like that, so the idea of convenience. I will tell you, it's kind of why sometimes you find daycares out in rural areas, right? Because the business hub is 20 miles away or 30 miles away, so somebody has that at-home daycare business that they'll operate for that vicinity or that area. So all I can tell you is businesses at these scales, this is not unusual to see this type of activity associated with an ag or a rural zoning district in other jurisdictions. I can't tell you what percentage do and don't.
No, and that's fine, I understand. So I guess my thought process is the way this business is set up, it seems like a lot of coming and going and a lot of movement, a lot of traffic, whereas, say, a lawn care business is more storing their stuff, they're leaving for the day, they're coming back, there's not as much movement, there's not as much traffic, there's not as much people and things, and I guess in my mind I see those as different types of businesses. You know, if I'm working on a tractor, that's not a bunch of customers coming and going, and that's kind of where my head is at in trying to come around with commercial. That's why I kind of compared it to a food truck, because I see a lot of, well, I would see a lot of coming and going and noise.
And Councilmember Deaton, when we think about these things, all of you are asking the right questions, is what I'm telling you. You're in the vein of what the concerns are, because even with conditional use permits in a suburban neighborhood, when we have home occupations and home businesses, and we look at those conditions, many times what we're looking at are the factors of traffic, light, safety, noise, the materials that are being handled, the percentage of the building that is being utilized for the business versus the residents. So everything that the Planning Commission has questioned and looked at, the things that you're asking about, are all in those veins of the concerns. And the issue then becomes one of, how do you kind of view this? Do you see it as more of a detrimental impact on the neighborhood, or do you not see it that way, or do you believe that some of these things can be mitigated by certain conditions? And that's where you all come in as decision makers.
So I'm looking at the format of the property itself. It's very much skewed as a 4-to-1 north-south versus east to west.
It's a volcano key lot for Johnson County.
Exactly, 330 feet by almost 1,300 feet long. Okay, 330 feet wide. When you're talking about a building that's approximately 40 by 80, I believe is what you were looking at, that takes up about a quarter of the width of the north end of the property. My understanding of looking at the map that I'm looking at right now, the plats, that is farmland directly to the east of the north end of the property. Am I not mistaken?
Just pasture
Ron?
land.
Yeah, it's pasture land associated
Pasture
with
land
residential.
associated with yeah. But the other thing is that I'm assuming that you might have an option, I'm talking to the friends right now, the option of potentially subdividing that property further in the future. Am I not mistaken in that?
Yeah,
Because that's a big property.
We've had people interested in buying, but they're not gonna buy if there's a dog pound. It's
Okay.
gonna hurt the value.
All right, so there's another potential aspect at play. What I'm saying is that everything has a unique context. Although the statute and the ordinances might state, hey, this is a 10-acre parcel and it's considered large format, that the character of the property, given the large estate lots that are out here, might be able to support something like this. There's a bigger picture involved. That's the part of the policy governance aspect of why we're up here at the dais. So I appreciate the work that you've done, Dave, and I know that Bob's been working very hard on this as well. And I commend the applicant for attempting a new business. I know that you want to get off the road and you want to be able to have stability and be able to bring your business here. Gardner could use a boarding business, at least 2 or 3. Because right now we got dogs running loose all over the city. I think that's rather famous on certain websites. I don't think that I am necessarily inclined to approve this or to go against the Planning Commission's recommendation. That's the way I'm speaking on this. Again, we'd have to go against our own Planning Commission in order to be able to pass this. So I think I said my piece.
Sure, absolutely. And Mark?
sorry, I've just been listening, and I guess maybe the only question I have, Dave, is if it wasn't I'm hesitant to call it a commercial business, because it looks to me like, and we had people speak to, they have their own businesses there as well that are commercial. If they were to build a barn for housing of animals, of whether it be horses or cows or whatever, would they still have to come before us and have to have the same rigor?
So there are standards for livestock and how many you can have per acre, so that would all be looked at, and those are standard within the codes. So if we're talking about typical farm animals, in that sense, what you would have is a different standard that's applied under the ag zoning, but they are required, there's only a certain amount that are required or allowed per acre. So there would be limitations that are placed on the cow, horses, those kinds of things.
I've got a couple more questions. I haven't really made my mind up one way or the other. What are the business hours? What are the hours of operation where people can pick up and drop off dogs? What are your business? Because I'm hearing a couple things as major concerns. One is the headlights, you know, stuff comings and goings and whatnot. And also, if this was to get approved, would you be okay with it? Would you be good with the additional restriction put on there that time to time there would be sound measurements unannounced that could be detrimental to your business? Would you be able to stand by the audio engineering that you're putting forward?
Yeah, I think so. So for traffic, because that's been a concern as well too, right? Is nobody wants cars coming in and out.
I guess I'm asking, what are your business hours?
Yep. So business hours for pickup and drop off will be between 8 and 5 p.m. on there, right? So normal standard business hours on there, which are scheduled by me on there. Expectation is that on a typical day, you'll have maybe 10 cars coming in and out throughout the day, right? I manage the appointments on there. I manage the pickup, the drop-off times on there. So if it was a food truck, they'd probably be out of business pretty quick, right, with the amount of traffic that I'm talking about here. Not past 5 o'clock, right, because headlights and things like that, that's a valid concern from the neighbors on there. We don't want that happening on there, so that's why that was set. Acoustical guidelines and things like that, right, on there? Yeah, I mean, that's how we're setting up everything, designing it. We'll make sure that it adheres to that, so whatever we need to check on that.
You'd be open to random unannounced traffic?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, no problem.
Steve, I just...
If I could, one quick thing, because after, for like quiet times and stuff, dogs will be boarded all evening, right? So once nighttime comes in, they won't be outside, of course, either, right? They don't have free roam to go outside into, kennels or something like that to where they can be barking. They'll be boarded, all enclosed in the evening. Yep.
I guess this time I'd be real inclined to want to try to send this back down to the planning commission, have this kind of worked on a little bit more, and see if we can get this massaged where everybody can come away with this thing looking like they're feeling whole.
What criteria would you send it back?
I would send it back with 2 additional requirements. One is to publish business hours, not before 8, not after 5. And I would also suggest that it would be subject to random inspections for noise pollution around the perimeter of the property. That seems to be the 2 major concerns I'm hearing. If we can get those issues addressed, I don't see what would be
Who would do the noise inspections? I mean, I'm not sure we're set up to
I feel like that's
take decibel readings.
Okay.
We've talked about that before. I'm hesitant to, and then setting the criteria, and then we're opening ourselves up to what is that criteria?
I would agree.
To your point, who's making the measurement? I understand exactly where Councilman McNair is coming from. I'm curious
I
what
don't
we.
care what it is at the road, the houses are set back anyway, that's what he cares. We'd always have to get permission from the neighbors and so on.
Well, I'm trying to figure out some way to hold business accountable to the plan that they put forth.
They already are, in the sense that you have nuisance laws, right? We have conditions that can already come up if my dog in my backyard in a subdivision in towns be a problem, right? So you don't have to randomly come check it, used to have dogs.
Man, Mark.
I guess, Mark,
I love
what
that a little.
what I'm saying is, maybe we can put an administrative, a one-year administrative review on something, like ask the planning commission to put a one-year administrative review, that they've done with other conditional use permits and stuff.
Yeah, but this is a significant financial investment on the part of.
But I would also ask, in a year,
Absolutely.
where would you even be? I mean, would your building be built, would you, I mean, your,
I couldn't even say it right now, right? So I've got basically holding pieces for getting the building put in place. So in a year, I mean, we'd be up and running, presumably, right? But it'd be pretty early on, I would think. Yeah.
Mark, I know you've had some thoughts and questions. I know you want to get in.
Okay. So, I was digging through the code while we were sitting here anyway. Car lights, I'm not concerned about. You've got the business hours aspect. You also have the screening is required because it's a kennel. Regardless of any other criteria from the planning commission or anything else, it fits, right, from that standpoint. So car lights, not an issue because you'd have to have screening. Done. Okay. Noise. Sounds like he has a mitigation plan. If not, people will complain. There's a process. That's addressed in one way or another. Whether or not it's successful or not, don't know. Benefit of the doubt. Traffic. Doesn't sound like you'd have a huge amount of increase. My biggest concern coming into this was what Casey brought up, that it's commercial. Granted, I did dig back into the agriculture. I mean, you could have a riding stable. You can have a whole bunch of chickens. You can have all sorts of other stuff in this area because if you mix it ag, or even as residential, you can have a whole bunch of animals or things that make noise. So, from what I'm hearing, all the criteria is being met. Now, we may have reservations about them, and my biggest reservation was that it's commercial. But since we allow it by code, I don't know what criteria we're using to say, you can't do this. I mean, he's putting in a whole lot of money to put in a concrete driveway or some asphalt, whatever. He purposely put it back, plus the code says it has to be 660 feet back from the nearest residence. Okay, so not close. Already has to do the screening. We could put the stipulation of pickup times, which are during daylight hours. So car lights, I feel like, are off the table almost. They're not even an issue. So noise sounds like it's not an issue, and we have a process to deal with it. So, I mean, if the man is willing to put the money in and knowing that you can still have nuisance that people complain about your noise, and then go through that process and your 5 years might get pulled, right? Just because it's 5 years doesn't mean it's guaranteed if you have problems. I'm really having a hard time finding what we're using to say that you wouldn't be able to do this. And I'm really having a hard time figuring out what the PC had with it, other than it originally started with commercial.
Yeah.
But as Casey's comments got addressed, it's doable. It's allowed. So why
I
are
think
we
it's
saying
a
not?
contextual issue around the properties directly around it being
I get that.
residential.
It's pushed far back. It's almost always that the dogs are inside for the most part. I mean, yes, I know
That's-
during the day they're going to be in and out at times.
But this is information that wasn't in the discussion at the
That's
planning
fair.
commission.
That's fair.
And so this is good, this is new information, it's good information. I think a couple of the items that had here might have assuaged some of the concerns of some of the people that were opposed to this, okay? Particularly the night issues. So having people, having dogs barking outside all night long.
That's a problem.
All night long.
But they're not gonna be outside.
That's what I'm hearing from the applicant.
Mark, you did a great job selling that. Thank you.
So, does I guess after my summation, what concerns do you still have, Steve? Or
My concern is really around, or was really around two things. One, the contextual nature of the properties around that location, okay? The fact that although this is considered large format properties, they're not truly large if you're only talking 330 feet from property line to property line, going wide, okay? a lot of the houses in this area are set back, which means even the folks that are on the Gardner Road side are also set back as well. They're not right on the on the street, and that's intentional. Okay. There is a concern that was expressed by a couple of the opponents that this would hurt their property values if they ever decided to subdivide the northern parcels. Okay, that's a valid concern. Okay, have they divided it? No, they have not. Right now it's pasture, so that would be something they would have to take into consideration if this is approved. So
He
that's.
could divide as well, right?
I'm sorry.
I mean, he could divide his property up as well, right?
Well,
That lawsuit, Steve, that was mentioned this evening, part of the state.
Yes.
If that goes south for the plaintiffs, there could be warehouses on the back.
There could be, but you're talking about a hypothetical there. In this case, this is if this is an approval and we have a conditional use permit that's pursuant to it, it's not hypothetical.
Well, I guess what I'm saying, Steve, is just dealing in that kind of issues on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
You can't pick who your neighbors are gonna be in the future. You can't say, this is gonna.
Of course.
Some people will be okay with it, some people won't. That's something that's an individual choice.
Well, it's literally 50-50 right now.
And
Exactly.
and the last aspect of this is that we would be overturning a 6-0 recommendation to deny by the Planning Commission. I'm just pulling it out there, and we've denied, we've overridden Planning Commission recommendations, but not 6-0 Planning Commission recommendations.
Well, 2
So
years
just,
ago, they didn't have all this information.
and that might have been that was the responsibility of the applicant in a lot of cases to have that information when they had the original hearing. So I'm just throwing it out there that we are setting a precedent, for better or for worse. You asked me what my concerns were. That was what they were.
I think mine would be a deeper question of, on what grounds did the Planning Commission deny it, other than the things we have now addressed?
So you looked up the agricultural and what was allowed.
Oh, gosh.
What is, and maybe this is a better question for Dave than Mark, obviously.
Fine.
Currently,
Yeah.
they are zoned rural in the county.
Mm-hmm.
So let's pretend they didn't come into us. Would this be allowed under the rural?
So the county code at the time of annexation, the RUR, which is what counts here, these types of facilities, kennels, would be conditional use permits.
Okay.
So they would still, even with the RUR, would have to go through a similar
Correct.
process for this conditional use permit.
Right, but the RUR or our ag only allows certain types of conditional use permits, as we've gone over. And so if this is one that would have been allowed under that for a conditional use and would have gone under the same thing, so changing to ag doesn't really change.
We're really just going from county to city.
Right,
Correct.
so there's no difference between the RUR and the ag other than county and city.
Except there are, I will say, it's the equivalent district, but if we got into all the nuances of that whole zoning district, there are some differences. But what you see as far as allowed uses in this particular case, this happens to be in both of those codes.
Like we allow fireworks and they don't.
Generally, the way that the zoning classifications, and tell me if I'm wrong here, Dave, generally in zoning classifications, county versus city, the county allows more uses than the city.
I would say in a lot of counties, yes, but not Johnson.
You may have a point there. This is RUR, and by the way, I believe that the change in land use is also going to trigger the clause within the annexation agreements that it will not. Okay, I thought it was. Okay, so.
That's a sale.
Yeah, that would be only a sale, but not a change in development use?
Not to ag.
Not to ag.
It
Anything
actually
other than ag. Yeah, anything greater than ag and more intense than ag.
So if this was
Okay.
proposed in a zoning district that was of a greater intensity than the equivalent
Sure.
to the RUR, that's what would kick that in.
Okay, all right.
Quick question. Did the planning commission approve the first item then? Did they approve the RUR to agriculture?
They recommended denial in both cases, and I'm gonna correct Councilman Shute. It was 6-1 vote according to what I have in front of me on the.
6-1?
Yeah, it was 6-1 on those two.
But we didn't.
So there was 7 members.
No, I think it was.
I think that's a typo.
Yeah, it's 6-0.
Okay, it just was noticed.
There was one for.
That's what
Yeah.
In favor of the conditional use permit or in favor of the zoning?
It was 1 on both.
Yep.
I didn't
But
know we had
before-
seven.
Both recommendations were for denial. They were denial of the rezoning and denial of the conditional use.
Well, why?
Again, so.
And I know
Yeah.
it may be a silly
So-
question, but that one's more the.
So I'm going to say what the planning commission is exposed through the process is the public hearing process. That process of listening to the public triggered very similar questions to the questions that you're having. So if you go back to the YouTube video and you reflected on that portion of the minutes, I would say that was where some of their concerns were. I would say there was that concern about the business activity, kind of what you've heard from Councilmember Deaton. There was kind of that reflection of that. In particular with I would say a couple of the planning commissioners, it resonated pretty strongly with them. And I think at the end of the discussion, that's kind of how they landed with it. So that's where the difference between when staff's making recommendations and planning commissions are making recommendations. Our recommendations are coming before there's a public hearing. We're looking at the codes and we're looking at the specifics of it.
Mr. Friend, did you have a comment? If you could come forward, please.
I'm Ron Friend, 19880 South Gardner Road. I remember the day when we talked about coming into the city of Gardner. You remember that? Remember what would have happened if we hadn't, if Edgerton would have got the road first? He wouldn't have been able to build that because the code with Edgerton had to be warehouses, to have their type of North Point's rules. We come in, the first ones to come in the city of Gardner to be protected. And I hope we are going to be protected. Because I don't know if you know what the rules was, if Edgerton would have annexed across the road from us, then we would have been controlled, building and stuff by Edgerton. So we come into Gardner to get protected. And that's what we're asking for, protection from commercial use in our subdivision. And Mr. Bergdorf, I talked to him yesterday. He said it's gonna hurt his subdivision with just a few houses, but when people find out what's there, he said, I still gotta sell lots. And my 10-acre lot could be divided into 2 5-acre lots, and that would put one house, could be within 50, 75 feet, from my boundary line, probably the back one, which would be right across from that dog pen. And also the electric, they said tree line in there. There was 3 trees on the prints, 3 red cedars, I believe. And that's what would protect from the lighting and stuff like this. Well, 3 red cedars, I got more trees on my property, oaks, and I planted every tree you see on that 80 acres out there on my ground. So they do protect a little bit, but not much on sound. And I remember when the gentleman that lives at his place had pointing black labs, and he only had 3 of them. But you can ask Randy and anybody around here what them dogs sounded like in their neighborhood. And Frank could hear them from his house, and that's 600-700 feet from his house. But thank you very much. Please protect me.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just gonna correct myself. You're correct about the vote on there. I was looking, the CAF must have a typo in it. The actual vote was 6-0 in the minutes, the reflection of the minutes, so.
That's what I was looking at,
I-
so.
I
That's
was
okay.
looking at the CAF.
Nope, I appreciate it. Thanks, Dave.
When I look at it though, with this, I see mitigating issues or corrections, I guess, but we don't know 100% until they're done. We don't know what the smell is going to be exactly until it's done. I don't know what the sound's gonna be exactly until it's done. I mean, I hear decibels and this and that, but we don't know what the traffic's gonna be like until it actually happens. And so to me, it just doesn't make sense to put intense use like that into an area where there's subdivision homes. They've been there for this time. They didn't move into this. They didn't move next to this. We're asking to bring this into them. So to me, I'm not in favor.
I do want to also address for everybody too, because I think with Councilmember Baldwin's comments and things like that, when we're dealing with conditional use permits, there is a reason why these are considered conditional uses versus an allowed outright use. And it is so that you can consider the context around it, because when they're placed into the code, many times you're generalizing. You're saying, well, under regular circumstances or typical circumstances, these things would be acceptable. The reason we do conditional uses, though, is that we also recognize that there could be locations where, even though the zoning is there, the context is not quite right for what may be proposed or modifications to what's being proposed. So I just want to be careful of that, because there was questions about, well, what did the Planning Commission consider in that? And I think that's what they take into consideration as well, is they're listening to the discussion, and they're trying to, in their educated consideration of this, or informed consideration of this, they are trying to reflect on, okay, what is this context and how does this really relate to the context? And that's why they're conditional uses versus outright permitted uses.
Correct.
Under like a nuisance code regulation. So,
Dave, just to clarify, this was kind of asked earlier, but
It would be a motion.
do you want me to go back to the podium?
Yes,
you
please.
can, yeah.
Yeah.
And the motion that's made for this first recommendation
I think it's a motion to concur with the planning
concurs with
commission.
the other. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
reason to do one and not the other, correct? I mean,
We can make the motion
That'd
whatever
be
we
up
want.
to the
yeah, I
So-
mean,
so-
is there a desire to?
I think you should ask the applicant about that, because I will say this, from a city perspective, having the lands that are within the city limits zoned as city districts and city zoning makes it so much easier for us to administer those rules and regulations. But I would say you probably want input from the applicant as to whether that's even something that they would want or not want. I have not had that specific conversation with the applicant per se. So, and I don't know, Ryan, if you would think differently of that. I mean, there is an advantage to the city having that ag zoning, again, from an administrative standpoint.
I think that comes
But-
down to if we voted no on 2, do they want 1? The answer is no.
No.
I think that's
Alright.
that simple.
Well, we've had lots of discussion. Is there a motion either direction that would like to be made?
Make a motion to concur with planning commission recommendations to deny application.
Is there a second?
We should
vote them separately.
Yes.
This is just new business.
We
item
should
number
do
one.
two separate.
So you're making a new motion that's not.
To deny rezoning.
Yes.
That's what I meant.
So your recommendation is to concur with the planning commission and deny the rezoning.
That's my motion.
Okay. And the mayor does vote on these
And I
issues,
can
by the
second-
way, so.
I can second this.
Yes, you need a second, but I was gonna say.
I will second. So there is motion Shute, second Winters, adopt the recommendation of the planning commission and deny the rezoning of certain land located in the city of Gardner, Kansas. City clerk.
Do we call the whole roll on this?
Yes.
Okay. McNear. Baldwin.
No.
Deaton.
No.
Weed.
No.
Shute.
Yes.
Winters.
Yes. Okay, so then is there a motion?
Motion fails.
Motion fails. Is there a motion?
I put a motion out to approve the zoning as proposed.
Override the recommendation of the
Override
planning
the
commission.
And approve the zoning.
Is there gonna be any more discussion on number 2 before we make this vote on number 1? That's my question. Is everybody ready to vote on 2?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
believe so.
Okay.
Second?
Second.
Okay. So, motion McNair, second Ween.
Are we, just so we're clear, I mean, planning commission recommended denial. Are we,
So this would be a motion to recommend the rezoning and adopt the ordinance for rezoning the property to ag.
With a supermajority vote.
Yeah.
conditions?
Are those additional conditions ones that,
There are no conditions on
On
the
the
first
rezone.
one
Not till we
for
get
the
to
rezoning.
conditional use.
yep.
That's why I asked if we're gonna have a conversation on number 2.
We can
There's
still
no
have-
point
we can-
going through
we can
number
still-
1 if we don't get.
Are we gonna discuss any additional conditions for number 2 than what's listed?
I see your point.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'd like to put some condition on the businesses, if the business is limited to daytime hours only, no evening, dogs cannot be out after.
Yeah.
Yeah, 8 to 5.
But like dogs still have to go out after
gonna-
5 o'clock.
Yeah, there's
Can I just make a friendly
bathroom breaks.
recommendation?
Yes.
We can take these out of order. Why don't we take up number 2 first? Because if number 2 gets denied, we've got the
Okay.
conditions in there.
Okay.
Attach the
Fair
condition
Okay.
to the conditional
That all
use
provides
permit.
Thank you,
motion.
Ryan.
Thank you.
Then if
Thank
it
you.
gets denied, then they don't want number 1.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. Thank
Th-
you.
Then I'll
So do we-
withdraw my motion, make a new
Because they
motion.
didn't make the motion, okay.
Approve conditional use permit with the additional restriction of business hours 8 to 5.
But that's beyond just that, because they'll be boarding 24/7.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to say the word business hours, right? You're talking
Pick up
about
and drop off hours.
And you also had
Can we
discussed,
enforce that?
yeah, that's difficult to enforce.
Well, it'll likely be complaint driven, number one.
Well, everything
So
with this.
at some point, that's where we would have to go out and see what's going on. We'd have to send somebody out, whether it's code enforcement official or somebody from my office on a zoning check. So it would be complaint driven, and we'd have to look at it from that perspective. I'm also going to indicate, you talk about the pickup drop off. I think the other thing I heard was the outdoor activity. Is that also what you're including in the conditions? So the outdoor,
I'd like
like
to
runs
make
and
sure-
exercise area would have to be shut down by the same hours, basically run the same hours.
To the applicant, did we hear that the dogs would be inside in the evening?
Correct, overnight, yeah, so, somebody mentioned, yeah, after 5, they'll still have to go outside for bathroom breaks and things like that, right? We're all-
But overnight?
Overnight, they will be boarded inside, yep.
If we're gonna make that a condition though, we'd have to define what does overnight mean. I
Exactly.
mean, because,
Between the hours of.
and if a dog gets sick and
Civil twilight.
I have mastiffs, if my dog gets sick and it's
What-
1 o'clock in the morning, he is outside, like.
But at 9 to 6 a.m., 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., or 5 a.m. be-
No.
Typically, yes, I would say that that's appropriate, except for outlying circumstances, right, where I'll be
Right.
taking care of them. So that would be the expectation.
So we could put a restriction on there, pick up and drop off 8 to 5, no dogs outside after 9 p.m. until 6 a.m. the following morning.
Let me throw something out there for you, Steve. If the car lights are not an issue because of screening,
That's not the case.
then why don't we let him have as much rope as he wants to hang himself?
I agree.
So, I mean, obviously he knows that if he has dogs out at 2 a.m. screaming and hooting and hollering,
He's gonna be out of business.
he's gonna have a problem. So, I mean, yeah, then we don't have to define anything. You don't have to worry about overnight hours. It's incumbent on him to meet the criteria,
Okay.
knowing that he has already, a divided group here.
Then I'll just put a simple motion out that we approve the conditional use permit and override the planning commission's recommendation.
With conditions, are you talking about
saying-
conditions?
Well-
You're just,
Well,
With the conditions that are already there.
Well, yeah,
Conditions are there.
okay, so
Well, those were
conditions in the staff
recommendations,
recommendation.
Not actual conditions in the motion,
Right.
so we would like to.
With staff.
you would want them to be conditions. The staff recommendations become the conditions,
Conditions.
like the waste mitigation and the
Exactly.
screening.
Okay.
Can, well,
Do we need to send this back to
We,
planning?
we We definitely could do that.
clean this up?
We could do that.
You could
Send
direct
it back to them, let them
you
keep
could
it
direct
around.
them to look at what issues you.
But here's,
Yeah.
but here's the
Yeah.
thing, and the concerns about noise and lights that have been expressed by the opposition to this need to be addressed.
They are.
They aren't.
How is the
I don't
screening and the acoustic?
The screening is one thing. Noise mitigation is not. Unless, I'm talking about outdoor noise mitigation. It's not in here.
Steve,
Okay? Let me finish.
that's fine.
Okay? If you're talking about, okay, we're just going to let them be able to pick up at all hours of the day and night, and then we'll just have a complaint driven, that's not sufficient to me. I don't think it's sufficient to anybody in the back of that room. Okay? So I don't think it should be a free-for-all. I think it's doing a disservice to this neighborhood. Period. There's a neighborhood character here that has been established, and these are not your standard rural large format lots. They are narrow. They are not wide. Okay? As you can probably tell, I'm a little passionate about this because they are right. They were the first people who agreed to be annexed into the city of Gardner on 199th Street. The first ones. And they got the momentum done to get all of 199th Street annexed. And to ignore their concerns, we do that at our peril. All right?
You're talking.
There's a
apples to
policy
oranges.
governance aspect of this that no one is considering right now.
I get that, but that's apples and oranges.
I don't think
Because
so.
To Mr. Friend's point, as far as being protected, he has been protected from Edgerton bias. We're not talking about his neighbor. That's different. We're talking about property rights and people being able to do things, not city versus city.
I'm in
Plus, we shut down the trucks on 199th, which is
No.
protecting them.
You have
And-
not.
And each property owner, as much as you want to respect the Friends, you have to respect this owner as well.
I do.
Wanting to do something, and you also are forgetting that you have another property owner on the other side saying, I'm good with it. So you can't say this one gets so much power
No.
and this one doesn't. You have to look at it in totality.
Is it right then for us to send it back to planning commission to, because we're talking around an additional item that we can't get our arms around.
If the planning commission denied it because it was commercial, and then we have looked at the agriculture zoning and the rural zoning, and this is allowed in both of those zonings as not considered commercial, should we have them look at it without that commercial aspect to look at what the conditions could be to make this work if they can find them?
Well, I mean, we definitely can. I feel like from watching the video that was already presented, and there was a loud enough voice that said, I still feel like it's commercial.
Steve, I respectfully disagree. One of the things that I've been involved with is voice training for medical conditions I have.
Mhm.
And it's to get my voice above 60 decibels in normal conversation. And 60 decibels is about where I'm at, where my voice is right now. And that's 20 decibels above what the business owner or business applicant is proposing. So when I look at the complaint letter from the Friends, and I agree that they have property rights, but it says, we've talked about there's no more traffic room to speak of. We're talking about daylight hours, so there's no excessive headlights. And we're
Okay.
talking about keeping things under 50 decibels, so there's no really.
You just
excessive
mentioned the
noise.
headlights. There's not going to be headlights. What in these criteria is showing that that's the case?
He has agreed to business hours, pickup and drop off hours of
All right.
8 to 5.
They're not in the criteria. We have to add it.
There's screening to where the headlights are not an issue anymore. And you literally have an entire tree row other than a couple sections.
Not on the east
back
side.
to the south side, on the east side, where unless somebody is, when they first come in, turning in from the east, turning in, going north, you would have something shining right into the Friend's house. You put some screening there, I assume trees, but screening, and then you get further down, and then only on the way back south on the new driveway is there a issue with potentially, and this I'd have to even look at closer, would be where there's a couple sets of trees, and then there's a tree in the Friend's yard that blocks the back of their house on the northwest corner. So, seems like the screening, the car lights, doesn't matter if it's 3 a.m., they're basically not an issue. In my opinion, that's why every time we came up with an issue here, I kept seeing that, oh, that's being handled.
Okay, so I'm looking here. Provide visual screening from adjacent properties along the east side of the proposed facility. Berms,
There's appropriate means for screening
all right?
listed in our code.
So they'd have to put like bushes up or berms or,
Obviously, if we express this concern, Dave staff's gonna make sure that it's appropriate screening.
So the way staff would look at this is very similar to what we've done in other situations where we look at parking lots and things like that, what level of visual buffering, and then where does
Yep.
it get placed? So there would be a process by which the applicant would have to provide us with a more detailed landscape plan. We would review it in light of some of the code requirements that we typically use for that kind of screening.
okay?
Now, without the specific plan before us, you're taking a risk that staff is going to look at this and mitigate it.
We trust you
take care of
guys.
it. So,
Mr. Friend, I think we had another
I would,
question.
I would like to ask,
If you could come up forward, please, to the.
okay, so all the existing trees that are there now, these are not evergreen trees. These are deciduous trees that lose their leaves in the wintertime. So this is gonna be good for 6 months maybe? And how long do I have to deal with waiting for these trees that we're gonna plant to get big enough to do any good? Is that gonna take 20 years?
Those are valid.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So these are the things that we need to think about. My property value means a lot to me. I don't know what anybody else had concerns that were in favor. I don't know what it would do to, benefit them, so. I'm
That's
the
why
one
I
that
was
stands
asking
something
ab-
to lose.
That's why I was asking about berms, because berms are permanent. And it,
Nope. Again, I think staff is seeing the consternation and would recommend something appropriate, and then if this property owner can't meet that criteria, well, then this is off the table. It's one of the criteria to make it happen before he gets the building permit.
And that's very similar to what we did with the hibachi site. The conditions to move forward.
yeah, no, we had 12
Business owner
conditions.
decided that was too much of a hill to climb.
So you're saying this would be done at a staff level then?
It would have to be.
Granting of the conditional?
Well, no, they can't grant the conditional use. Only we can do that.
Right, correct, I'm
Right.
saying, once that was granted, then
Now,
staff would.
we could put in specific criteria if you want to direct them,
Well, that's,
but I don't know why we would do that here versus any other time.
I'm going to interject for a second, and as I was sitting there thinking about this, and Ryan, I'm thinking out loud, so when I do this, just slap me. With this discussion, and I really do appreciate the fact that it's been publicly stated that you trust staff, which goes a long way with me. But I'm almost at that situation where if you are concerned about those things, what I would prefer to do is that you table this item, have the applicant come forward with a screening plan.
yeah.
And that comes back to you to see if it meets your concerns and your issues.
I
instead
would
of
be
leaving that with
very
staff.
much more,
That's
reason.
reasonable.
I'd be more amenable to that.
Because of where we're at in this discussion and what's going on, I would feel much more comfortable with that kind of effort coming back forward, because we may then be able to assess it in light of your concerns to see if that's adequate, meeting the adjacent property owners, for you all to feel comfortable with it, things like that.
Is there a
Because you,
time-
again, are the decision makers on this. So
Is there a time sensitivity on this rezoning?
I don't think there is. I don't think it's like immediate, needs to be done, like building parts are on order or being
Right.
shipped or anything like that.
I'm going to make a motion then to table new business item number 1.
We have a current motion on the table.
Yeah.
Oh, are you
I'll
right?
withdraw it.
You withdraw the motion?
Can I ask a
I
question
did-
before you?
Yeah, one more question, and then I think Mr. Friend did have one.
Yes, you're right.
So if we choose to table this to get a plan for the screening, could we also include in that, if the applicant comes back with a presentation on that, could we have a presentation on some of the other conditions, like
Yes.
what is gonna be done for the noise, what is gonna be done for that way we don't have to like bring up
Yes.
another.
I would
issue.
agree.
We
Just
could do that.
Everything
basically
is
a
addressed.
point by point on
Yeah.
how these 6 criteria that you have listed here
Right.
with the underlying conditional use permit would be addressed.
Is there anything else other than those items?
I don't, well, it sounds
Speak
like,
now or hold your peace.
I'm,
Okay,
so.
Mr. Friend, yeah, if you could come forward.
Mr. Friend?
Ron Friend, 19880 South Gardner Road. You mentioned, have you been out to the property?
I haven't been on it, I've been by it.
Okay. You're welcome to drive in my driveway where the old barn is, down below or my original farmhouse where I live. You drive in, drive right on down that drive around there and all the way down to where the barn's gonna be. There's about 3 trees between that barn, between where his building will be and up to my property by 10 acres. Or it could be 2 5-acre lots. If it was 2, it would put one house very close to that. And, at that part there, it's just, noise-wise, I'm not a decimal person. I don't know what you're really referring to on that, but I do know what a dog sounds like barking. I don't know where the information comes for so many decibels for a dog or big dog, little dog, what dog. But if you all Google it, how far could a dog be heard? It's a mile or more. And that's what I come up with, a Google on my phone. I don't have no fancy deals or anything else to tell that, but before you vote on it, find out just how far that dog can bark. Or how far, not how far can he bark, but how far can you hear a dog, really?
Yeah.
And the dogs that was on that place, Frank could tell you, he could hear them from his house. Now that's 660, 330, 990 from his house, right across. There's a barn and stuff, houses between them. But you can't hear them dogs a long ways. And I just don't want, like I said, he's been a good neighbor. But I don't want to see him go into putting this barn up, because I guarantee you that there's going to be complaints on dogs. Unless he's got dogs that can't bark. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's okay if I should say something.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Just very quick.
Please.
I kind of had a whole speech here, but I'm just gonna do a very small section of this. Sorry, Angela Carmen, 29852 West 199th. So I'm Jason's wife. And one of kind of our biggest concerns here is yes, we have addressed the concerns of our neighbors and of the Planning Commission, and I know Jason has addressed a lot of your concerns as well tonight. One of the bigger concerns right now for us is that we've dropped a lot of money already for this. The request from the Planning Committee to redraw engineering stuff, we had to do a water test. And so if it ends up being a request to now draw out screening plans for then ultimately going back to the Planning Committee and approval, that's more money that we're already putting forward. And if it's ultimately not approved, that's just more money being lost, right? And so I guess just for consideration to move through the process tonight. I mean, obviously, we don't want to create division here with our neighbors. We don't want to continue drawing this out. We had to go through 2 Planning Commission meetings already. We're now seeking possibly 2 more city planning meetings and then more Planning Commission meetings. And so ultimately, we want to see this through. We really do. We really strongly feel we have a very strong case to be able to make this successful and to keep our neighbors happy. But if we just continue to be denied, well, if we continue having to drop more money in just to only be denied, that's just so much more that we're losing as a family, right?
So, don't mean to interrupt. Thank you very much for your comments. Dave, we're not talking about sending this back to the planning commission. We're talking about tabling this.
That was my suggestion.
To a time
Let's
certain,
still
and that would
stay
be-
at this level.
Yeah, it would be staying at this level, so you wouldn't have to go back to planning commission.
Okay. But if
All
have
we
to
would need,
redraw
well, no,
things?
not necessarily
Not
redraw.
necessarily.
It would be a screening plan, which would basically be taking your existing plat and just showing on the plat where the mitigating, the sound
Where
and,
and what
and
kind.
the sound and light mitigating places are going to be there and what's the medium, and you would work with the staff then to actually identify how that would be taking place.
So wouldn't
You
we
would-
have to redraw that though with our engineering team?
I don't,
You wouldn't necessarily need a re-engineered drawing. I think you could use some of the site plans you have.
Correct.
Already, and then it'd be added to it. Now, what you have to be careful of, obviously, the engineers only stamped what is actually on those drawings. So Bob would work with you a little bit on how
Okay.
you could mitigate that to get the information that is, what I'm hearing is what they would like to see as far as landscaping. So
Yeah.
that's just something, we can look at the code and what the code requirements are and things like that to give you
Okay.
that idea. So basically, it comes down to a little bit of quantities, types,
Mhm.
and also distances and locations, so.
and permanent barriers versus,
Yeah, if there's something where it's a berm versus the use
A
of.
tree line.
of the,
Yeah.
trees or vegetation.
Deciduous versus.
Correct.
That's a good point.
Okay.
So I mean, that's your staff would work with you on that, so we can, I think there's a way to utilize some of the drawings we've already got as base drawings.
yeah.
Okay. I mean, I definitely appreciate that. I just want to, my last comment is, with the money that we've already put towards this, I mean, it shows how dedicated we are to make sure that we're not going to interrupt our neighbors. And we're going to see this through according to the plan, according to what the neighbors are wanting for those that are opposed. Because the last thing we want to do is create a problem.
Appreciate that, thank you.
It seems
Thank you.
like there is a way for everyone to get out of this okay. Right? I think that there is a way to make this possible without disturbing the neighbors. With what's presented and what can be done. Now, maybe that's not true. You guys will figure that out.
Yep.
Okay?
It goes back to staff level, and then it will come back to us at a later date.
The motion has been withdrawn.
So
Yep.
Steve, did you wanna make the motion?
I'm gonna make them, I actually have to make these motions separately because they're two separate business items. But, I think, do we have to do a time certain on this, table, or do we say, table it for?
Table it, it comes back to the next meeting.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Do we have to, will 2 weeks be enough?
We can always retable it then if we need to.
You could do that, or you could request an extension until.
First meeting in April?
Staff puts it back on the agenda,
Let's do that.
stating that the item's ready to proceed.
Yeah, okay.
That could
So
be-
we will make a motion to extend this item, continue this item. I think that's a continuous, isn't it? Continuous of this, of new business item number 1, which is the rezoning, to a time deemed ready by
One
the,
and
by the staff.
1 and 2.
I can't do 1 and 2. They're separate items.
I'll second.
One's
that.
an ordinance, and
Shoot.
yeah,
Second McNair,
that we table.
that we table.
Sorry, that we continue to time certain. Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain.
So that motion.
Committee recommendation number 1 is continued to the next.
To a time and date of staff's.
Staff's gonna work to get it back to you as quickly as possible.
Sure.
2 weeks may be a little bit difficult just
Yeah.
because of the nature of our timing with packet development and other
Correct.
things, but
Okay. Committee recommendation number 2.
I'll make a motion to continue committee recommendation number 2 in tandem with committee recommendation 1.
Second.
Motion Shoot, second McNair, that we continue committee recommendation number 2 in tandem with committee recommendation number 1. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain? Committee recommendation number 2 is continued.
Mr. Mayor, just because of the audience that's here tonight, I just want to indicate too, I'll be instructing Bob Case to get with the applicant and things to start working on this because I'm gone tomorrow. So to keep this thing.
Convenient.
How convenient.
Yeah, weren't you were gone for like 2 months,
Yeah.
just not too
Wait.
long ago?
Trust me.
Way to go, Tom.
Trust me, I'm going to continuing education, which I have no
Okay.
choice but to go to.
Okay.
So, at the end of the day, though, I will be instructing Bob to do that. I would tell all of the people that are interested in this item that Bob Case should be the primary contact to call into our office at Community Development. We'll be glad to provide updates as to how it's progressing and things in advance. Since it's not a published public hearing per se, it'll be the packets, so I would say everybody should watch those agenda packets as they're published. But certainly they can call Community Development and talk to either Bob or Jesse to see what's going on and what the anticipated timing is once we've got a better idea of that.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Okay. No old business, no new business. We'll go to council updates. Chief Waldeck.
I don't have any updates.
Renee?
No updates.
Finance, Matt?
Nothing tonight.
City Attorney, right?
Nothing from us.
Utilities, Cons.
Yes, I would like to take a few minutes to talk about the FOG program.
Yes.
So the FOG stands for fats, oils, and greases. So we call it FOG. The program was implemented in 2020. What the FOG program is trying to do is prevent from fat, oil, and greases from entering the wastewater system, which causes routine maintenance and also clogs the sewer system. So the system is tailored mainly, aimed mainly at food service establishments. That's from KC, pizza places, any type of restaurant. Under the FOG program, there is the food service establishment are required to be part of the program. So every year we issue a letter reminding them to submit a information on the establishment and also to pay a $300 fee. Under the program, any establishment that doesn't have enough fats, oils, or greases, they're exempt from installing a grease interceptor. They're not exempt from getting out of the program. So the exception is based, hey, we don't require a grease interceptor at this time, but that can change if your food service expands or they change their menu. So that's the word exempt is from putting the grease interceptor, not exempt from the program. So for every year, each establishment has to provide us a new information. We review it. We send a technician to review the establishment and make sure that nothing has changed. If things change, then we have to review it and see if a grease interceptor merits to be installed in the establishment.
Thank you. And the reason this was brought up is I was contacted by a restaurant owner who has little to no grease. And his concern, though, was he gets the exemption, but each year he has to pay another $300 to get the exemption. And so, you know, is it strictly staff time that we're paying the $300 for? It just seems once you've kind of exempted out, you know, maybe a small fee each year to maintain that would seem reasonable. But
so the fee is mainly for our staff to visit the establishment, review the information, and then put it in the system. That's mainly the $300.
How long does that review take? Is it several hours at a business?
It will take maybe an hour. Then somebody go into the establishment, take a look, make sure that nothing has changed. We do inspections on the sewer or the grease interceptors if they have one.
Is that is that fee schedule based on on a acceptable or accepted charges that other communities might be assessing for these same services, or?
So the program was based mainly on Johnson County wastewater system.
Oh,
So we adopted basically the same regulations and guidelines.
okay.
If a business is not exempt, and so they had to put the grease thing in.
Grease traps,
the
yeah.
interceptor, do they still have to pay a $300 yearly fee to get inspected?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I was asked by a, small business owner,
But
margins are small.
well, yeah, and they're getting smaller with the increases in prices.
Sure. Is it reasonable? I mean, would it be reasonable to, once they've been approved, to have a smaller fee, just to say, hey, everything's the same? Yeah, okay.
So, Gons, I mean, we will know pretty quickly with the, routine wastewater cleaning that we do, the camera inspections, if we have a violator that changed what they have been doing in the past, right? It seems like it wouldn't get too far down the road.
In some locations, it will be hard to determine if it's coming from A or B establishment.
Okay.
But for example, prior to implementing the fog program, we used to clean the line between the Fronteras restaurant and the bank almost once a month. Now that's being done almost semi-annual because, we're now looking at the amount of grease they're disposing or they're using, so we have better handle what's going on.
I guess where I'm going with that is it possible if we do a cursory, hey, has anything changed, and then trust but verify, and we do a quick inspection, and if that's the case, then there's not a whole lot of extra overhead in the office or anything else, and then we could do a larger inspection, if you will, every 3 or 5 years or something, almost like a conditional use permit, right? You get the opportunity to prove, but, verify it as needed.
Yeah, we can do whatever city council wants us to do.
I know that, but what I mean is, I don't wanna get to where we allow too much grease back, so we have the problems we had before.
Yeah.
Let me talk with my staff, see to what level we feel that, we can do something that might lessen the burden on the certain establishments.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you could do one up front and then, hey, nothing's changed, but we're gonna check you. $50 or $100 later,
Yeah.
we're down
That's
the
good.
road, and you
That's
don't have
how
to
I-
spend every year so much money to prove that you haven't done anything differently, right?
Have we ever had an exempt business become a non-exempt business in the same business?
Not to, so the program was adopted 2020, implemented in 2021, so in 3 years, we have not seen any
Yeah.
current establishments requiring a grease interceptor.
I think that's probably also why I think some of us are thinking maybe we need to review the policy.
We'll take a look at it. Bring something
Yeah.
back.
Okay, appreciate that, thank you.
Right. Maybe just add another tier structure in there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
for
trying to
exempt.
make it easy for
Yep.
small business. Okay. Thank you, Gons. Did you have anything else?
That's it.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the research. Jason?
Nothing tonight.
Dave?
Just so you know, I'm going to wonderful Kearney, Nebraska, so that's where I'm getting my continuing education from. Just letting you know. Nothing else.
All right, thank you, Dave. Kellen?
Nothing tonight.
All right. Councilman, or I'm sorry. City-
Nothing tonight.
No, okay. All right. Councilman McNair?
Nothing.
Councilman Ween?
Nothing for me.
Councilman Chu?
Nope, I've got nothing.
I have a question,
Yes, sir.
not a question, a comment before you close.
You can come on
If
up.
I could share.
You can come on up, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Frank Bannister. I spoke earlier. I've sat and listened to this whole discussion. I'm pretty amazed that that the city would even consider setting a precedent for allowing commercial operations like this in a city limit, where it is obviously a concern because we've spent 2 hours discussing the concern. Now, if you think you can write these concerns out by writing it down on paper, on hours and all that, that sounds good on paper. I can guarantee you there will be problems with this. Dogs barking have been problems for ages. And putting a kennel in where you can have 40 dogs and you're trying to think that that's not going to be a problem, and you're wondering, it's going to be a problem. I'm amazed that y'all would consider allowing this in a city limit. A commercial operation needs to be in a commercial area, not rezone something to make it commercial, where it's basically subdivision. We live in subdivisions out there. I'm amazed that you guys would consider allowing something like this in the backyard of a home. Would you want to live, Mark, would you want to live next door to a dog kennel?
I think the way that this is gonna be structured, that it would be doable, and I would.
Really? You really?
'Cause
Okay.
and I don't wanna get into it back
Yeah.
and forth with you, we can talk afterwards, but there's always gonna be a place where commercial meets up to some other zone classification, right? You could be in the middle of Overland Park at a, Wolf's and have a massive dog facility, and right behind it, you can have a subdivision. So, yeah, if it's handled appropriately, I think it's doable. Now, like I said, I'm willing to let a property owner have an opportunity to do something. I'm also giving him a lot of rope that if he hangs himself, that's his problem. Okay? So we have the nuisance process. So I'm just trying not to jump the gun and say, don't do this because there might be an issue.
Mhm. And so you would be in favor, if you vote,
Mr.
Mark.
Bannister, right?
Yeah, I'm
We-
just
we've
saying,
kinda
if
already
you
went through
approve
the-
this,
yeah.
you have to approve the one next door, the one next door, and the one next door if it's anywhere close like this. And you don't want to go down that path out here in that rural area that's now in the city limit. Trust me, you don't. But you guys have to do what you have to do. So thank you.
Mr. Bannister.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Now, so we have to wrap up. We've kind of
I
talked.
just want to let people know, I spent 23 years on the planning commission in the city of Gardner. 23 years. I never see turn over a decision that the planning commission made. I understand there's openings now.
Yeah.
You're gonna have a hard time getting somebody to go down there and put up, and it's a whipping post for everybody, because they all come in and talk here just like we do here. But people, you make a decision and you turn it over.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Casey?
Nothing tonight,
Mark?
No.
I've got nothing
Oh,
further.
sorry. That was you.
No.
Sorry.
Oh, we've already done Mark.
My
Mark,
fault.
second Mark.
Turn.
Yeah.
Mark?
All right.
Big Mark.
I've got nothing as well.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion shoot, second McNair. We adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.